Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So checking out a fun and exciting update video for you guys this evening, because about a month and a half ago I talked about Cosam the Great's recreation project trying to bring an entire Super Nintendo CD to life. And if you're not aware, that is a console that never truly existed because Nintendo canceled their deal with Sony before it actually made it to market, but it was very far along in the development process. One prototype does exist and it was sold a few years ago for about $360,000. And honestly, this is one of those projects, it just absolutely does it for me. Seeing a modern recreate hardware that never truly existed is just some of the most fun stuff I've seen in 2024 or 2025, and Cosam the Great has gotten a lot more progress on the project, which we're going to go over today. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But I remember the magazine previews for the Super Nintendo CD back in the day with that partnership with Sony, and obviously Nintendo backed up on that and canceled at the last minute, going over to Philips, who never got the project off the ground either, but did get the license to some Nintendo properties, hence those Legend of Zelda games on CDI, which are so incredibly bad. And in the last video, Cosam the Great showed off some of the board actually showing some signs of life. You can definitely tell this is not in any way, shape, or form a complete project right now, and I'm sure the board's going to go under a lot more revisions before it is finalized. 6, 10, 12, you never know how many board revisions it takes to get everything buttoned up. But Cosam is showing a lot of great progress, and the first thing is the board is now running under its own power. It also has all of the RGB video circuitry in there, so it's not running off an external amp as far as that is concerned. Audio is there, but apparently it's not 100%, but just getting to this phase in and of itself is absolutely an accomplishment. But let's take a look at a close-up of the PCB so you can see what is populated here. You'll see on the top left-hand corner you do have that power jack coming in, and you obviously have that Super Nintendo AV jack as well. You have a large heatsink with some capacitors and resistors on the corner here, and I love that the board uses what looks to be machine screws as standoffs, which is hilarious. And also, when you're just prototyping hardware trying to fix it or work on it, any part that works is the part that is right. You'll see here there is a small bodge wire, and you're going to see some original Super Nintendo chips and different connectors on the board, which will definitely get used for a lot more stuff in the future. And you'll see that audio and video circuit down here as well, but pretty much for the most part nothing there is populated. If we move over to the secondary photo here, you're going to see that video section is seemingly 100% populated outside of a few pads, and the audio is being worked on. There is one small bodge wire there, so it must have been a missing trace or something else. But even getting to this stage here with all of the different chips, the capacitors, resistors, and every other component that would be necessary to actually output video and audio is no small feat, and it's absolutely impressive to see. Clearly Cosam has the chops to do something like this, recreating the Neptune from scratch, but the Super Nintendo CD is just that much more exciting because it is a console that never existed. Sure, the Neptune was canceled, but it's just a Genesis and a Sega 32X, and you can buy those things separately and marry them together, getting the exact same experience. And obviously the RGB video sections as well as the audio sections are going to be very important, because if you want to play the one game that technically works on a Super Nintendo CD, Super Bass Gaiden, you're going to have video output and audio output. And I'm sure that the audio section probably has a little bit more hardware on board as well, because you are dealing with a CD format which does have Redbook audio, so it may need to transmit a little bit more data per second. I would be curious about that. But the reality is the Super Nintendo CD wasn't that much more impressive over a real Super Nintendo, so it really is just transmitting the data. And before we get involved into more of the improvements, Cosam does have a YouTube channel, and he mentioned you should go over there and subscribe. So let's bombard him with as many subscribers as we can get off of this video. The link is in the description below. Go bump his numbers up as hard as you can. Now, taking a look at the actual data transmission on the CXD 1800 CD decoder chip, it is actually talking to the Super Nintendo, or SFC here, meaning Super Famicom, and that is obviously a crucial component in the overall development of this. It has to be able to actually read the CD and talk to the hardware involved, or else you're never going to transmit the CD data, and that CD is going to be nothing more than just a simple coaster. Sure, this isn't the most visually impressive thing right now, but you have the DMA addresses right there, and you also have data on the actual communication between the CXD 1800 and the Super Nintendo hardware, and that is what the Super Nintendo CD was meant to do, to change from cartridges to CD and basically give Nintendo a new way to have that data storage, including some stuff like FMV video and Redbook audio. But if you can't actually get that data over the Super Famicom to execute, it is dead in the water. And clearly Cosam the Great here has that working. You'll also see that he's hacked in a GAL chip to do address decoding and buffer control. This is what's allowing the Super Nintendo to access the CD hardware, but right now this is obviously a very hacky job, no pun intended and no insult meant. It is just how these things get prototyped. You throw on whatever the hell works, and then from there you confirm that it is working, and then work back to make it a much more elegant process, because obviously this GAL chip here just being wired in like this would not be part of the final design. But a lot of times when I'm repairing arcade hardware, I will just strap something to the board in the stupidest manner possible to confirm it works, and then I'll go back and redo my work correctly, because there's no reason to finalize it if you don't know it works yet. And this is a lot to do with actually getting the CD data written over. You'll see here he talks about the flex footprint adapter, because the chip that actually works with the Super Nintendo CD is a prototype chip that never showed up in anything else from Sony. But the good thing is there are pin compatible models out there that you can use, and you'll see here the original footprint is going to be for the original chip that would have been on the prototype Super Nintendo CD, and this flex ribbon cable basically adapts that pinout down to a smaller chip that is compatible and will do everything that the prototype chip would have done. And it's very lucky those things exist, or else this project would never be able to be done. So if we take a look at the back of the CD-ROM drive from a prototype shown off back in the day, photo from Engadget here, you will see the chips on board, and these are some of the things that would be necessary to make a Super Nintendo CD. But Cosam has identified other models of chips out there also made from Sony that are compatible and can be used, and that is basically a savior of the project, because if those didn't exist you wouldn't be able to read data, and it would just basically be a very fun design board that didn't have any functionality included. So it's a good thing these actually do exist. As far as the chips are concerned, they can be harvested from other Sony products, which is absolutely great, because if you want one of these in the future to build, you're going to have those chips. So you'll see here Cosam has laid up a slightly different model, a CXD 1190AR, and this is from basically a CD data unit from Sony, which I'll show you in just a moment, that Cosam actually harvested the part from. But you'll see here with that flex ribbon cable, you just adapt down the footprint onto this smaller chip, but that means this chip is working on the system, and it will work to be a Super Nintendo CD and be able to communicate with the Super Nintendo and transmit that data over. So that is huge. He's got some of the CD hardware laid up in there, and now you could actually read from a disc if you had more than one game that actually worked on the hardware. And you'll see here he talks more about this simple test here, just reading register writes, and that is just basically data in memory that is being written or read to. And again, I know it's not the most visually interesting thing in the world, but it is a huge improvement over where the project was last time, because again, you're actually reading and writing data. That is all that this project does, is it pivots over to the CD-ROM and allows it to write the data and read the data, because it communicates with the Super Nintendo, and that's how it was designed to work back in the day. So you can see here again, not a lot visually interesting, but a lot of progress. And you'll see here this junk DD10, which was completely broken when Cosam got it, is one of the candidates to actually harvest the hardware from, and this is nothing I've ever seen in real life. Sony makes so many different strange products out there, but it makes sense that they have some way to transmit data from a CD. And you'll see here that CXD 1196R chip is on board, and that is what's working in the Super Nintendo CD prototype that Cosam the Great is remaking. So this might be a very popular and very expensive code in the future, you never know, and it basically replicates the same functionality as what we saw here in the prototype image. And that's not surprising at all. Sony spent the time to develop this thing, so they probably made a pin compatible, hardware compatible variant of it to use in the future, and just made a few changes or additions that don't really get used by the Super Nintendo CD, but would have been used by something else. And the funniest thing is just the timing. There was just recently an article on Time Extension about one of the employees of PlayStation talking about the first prototype game that he played basically being like Silpede. If you've never played that game before, it is a shmup that has a lot of FMV video going on in the background, which makes total sense for Super Nintendo CD. Just like Sega CD, you're showing off the FMV capabilities of the project while also having a game. But I thought this timing was absolutely hilarious to actually see something like this come up about another game on the Super Nintendo CD, because a lot were announced. We don't really know how far any of them got into active development, but seeing something like this just pop up at the same time that we talk about the Super Nintendo CD prototype from Cosam the Great just seems to be hilarious timing in my mind. behind. But all of the progress he's making is so promising. Maybe one day we could order one of these reproduction Super Nintendo CD cases, be able to populate those PCBs inside with the hardware, and play absolutely no games because again, basically nothing exists for the hardware. But I'm sure it's one of those, if you build it, they will come scenarios where if this actually exists, somebody out there is going to start making some games and experiences for it just to say they did it, and that is what really excites me, because you know I love canceled hardware on the channel, and the Super Nintendo CD was absolutely hyped to high hell back in the day, and it never came out. I've been curious about it ever since, and clearly Cosam the Great has as well, because he is well on his way, maybe 25 to 30% of the way there, who knows, I'm guessing at numbers, to reproducing a Super Nintendo CD that you could actually build in your home. Sure, you'd have to be very handy with a soldering iron, but some of us are, and we'd love to have them. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but next time there's more news on this, I'll definitely update the video. But we're done, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.